Dr. Manhattan was always a fascinating character, but one whose impact on the plot of Watchmen was usually the result of his passive compliance or mere existence. Very few of Manhattan's actions are the result of decisions left open to him, rather than the machinations of other forces. And yet, my favourite chapter of Watchmen remains issue 4, and my favourite before Watchmen book is definitively the 4-part Dr. Manhattan. Written by J. Michael Straczynski and drawn by Adam Hughes, the story appears to be taking place during Manhattan's trip to Mars, as we see him drop the photograph of Janie Slater and John Osterman, and later standing atop the Martian clock structure, which, crucially, we learn here is based upon a model clock John Osterman received as a child. As such, the story would seem to fail the titular requirement of the series, by not taking place before Watchmen at all. And yet, the story's ending would appear to require that this all happened earlier in order to make sense. And Dr. Manhattan does not have the ability to actually time travel, so these inconsistencies seem to be at best a conscious error in chronology. Fortunately, these problems are forgivable, because this bending of the rules engenders the telling of a superior story. You see, after Straczynski spends issue 1 rehashing much of the ground covered by the original, Manhattan decides to attempt to observe his own creation during the intrinsic field test at the Gila Flats testing facility in 1959. Straczynski, clearly a student of Watchmen mythology, actually has Manhattan note that this represents an extension of his abilities as they were originally conceived, and then even ties off the possibility of these new powers raising continuity questions by the story's end. Instead of simply remembering the past as we see in issue 4 of Watchmen, Manhattan actively extends his conscious mind backwards in time. What follows is a classic Schrodinger's cat story, riding the wave of popular attention paid to this conjecture during the noughties. The theory, as applied to this story, suggests that the quantum observer actually affects the state of the observed. In this way, light can be both particle and wave, cat can be both living and dead, and the Doctor can be both Manhattan and Osterman. As an avenue to tell an alternative history tale, quantum mechanics feels a particularly apposite analogy to the special relativity framework used in the original story. And happily, this alternative history is one with a great deal of reverence for the Watchmen universe. The story's central conceit splits multiple times to show how reality is affected dramatically by seemingly minor choices. Lee Harvey Oswald assassinates JFK in one reality and the comedian does in another, while another sequence shows how a different turn of phrase causes a nuclear holocaust. Straczynski even makes oblique reference to Max Shea, the in-universe comic book writer of the Tales of the Black Freighter. A third issue focuses upon the Osterman's flight from the Nazis during World War II, while managing to avoid unevenness by tying this aside back into the Schrodinger's cat motif, which also operates on a visual level. The art and design on display here make no attempt to adhere to Watchmen's traditional style, instead striking out in a new direction with non-linear page design which requires a more inquisitive approach from the reader. Choices such as the textured look of some pages lend the story an anachronistic quality, fitting in a time-traveling, dimension-hopping caper, while other visual cues like page tears suggest a medium awareness well beyond anything contemplated by Moore or Gibbons. Whether you will like this style is, of course, down to personal taste, but the book has an undeniable aesthetic appeal. But most importantly, the story delivers on the promise of Manhattan's character, explaining his passivity and how he could be fooled by a simple human. This book was the extra origin material I never knew I wanted to read, and it almost redeems the Before Watchmen event as a whole. But not quite.